Boom, welcome to Sollu Kaburz podcast, IPL special, cricket special. And today is a very, very special episode because I've been wanting to talk about this topic for a long time. It is the importance of West Indian players in IPL and the color they bring to this wonderful tournament. And to help me with that and to wade through this topic with me is Michael from the Caribbean Cricket Podcast. Thank you very much, Michael, for joining. What an absolute pleasure to have you. Big fanboy moment, big fan of your podcast.
Absolute pleasure to be on. No need to have a fanboy moment whatsoever. I'm absolutely honoured to be on your podcast, man. And yeah, just happy to have a chat. About all things West Indies. I got my hat on. I got my Jamaica flag in the background, so I'm set. I'm all ready to go, man.
Absolutely. So obviously your favorite team in CPL is Jamaican
Jamaica Taloa, sorry.
Talawas. That's right. Who's your Jamaican equivalent in IPL though?
So do you know what? So every year in IPL, I've always asked Santoki who he supports. I think Santoki supports because Santoki's watched IPL live.
Sure.
He's been out to watch it, and he's always supported Mumbai Indians just because that's the team he's got a jersey for. But I've always, if I tell you the honest truth, I've always supported whatever team Chris Gale is playing for. And that might be a Jamaican bias thing. It might be a Chris Gale bias thing, but definitely this year I'm supporting Punjab, but not just because of Gale. I mean, they've got Gale, they've got Pooran, and they've got Fabian Allen. So it's the team with the most West Indians on it. So it seems like that's where I should, that's where my loyalty should be this year.
Sure. Do you talk IPL on your podcast? I'm not sure because I love your podcast, been following it for a long time. One of my favorite episodes is the one that you did with Fazir Mohammed, which is a fantastic episode. And tell me something before we get started with this topic. Why there are less podcasts from Caribbean on cricket? Is it because the cricket is kind of losing its popularity, or is there any other reason that we don't know?
Do you know what? That's a really good question. And somebody asked me that exact same question no less than 2 or 3 days ago. And honestly, all I can say to you is the podcast medium in the Caribbean, I think, has been slow to take off. And don't get me wrong, once it does take off, it will there'll be a massive boom in it. But when we started the Caribbean Cricket Podcast, there wasn't something like this in the Caribbean. Now, part of that, I think, is because radio is still a massive medium in the Caribbean. So when I think about cricket shows in the Caribbean, I think about a show called Mason and Guest, but that's a radio show, and there's nothing wrong with it. I think most die-hard West Indian fans would listen to Mason and Guest, which is on the radio. But podcast in terms of a recorded podcast and audio podcast, that hasn't kicked off really, or the way I see it hasn't done. Visually, so I think there's starting to be a lot of what I'd call vodcasts, kind of what you and I do, kind of what you and I are doing right now. And I think that is probably going to be the next medium in the Caribbean in terms of talking on cricket. But when we created the Caribbean Cricket Podcast, I think we just happened to see that there was a niche for a regular kind of audio version or podcast version, I should say, of West Indian news. So really and truly, that's it.
Maybe one example of podcast that is coming up is the one that Michael Holding has started recently, which he's not pretty frequent on it, but he doesn't talk T20 cricket much, so you won't see him around when this T20 cricket is on, obviously. But the reason why I chose this podcast is because for me, I've always thought that IPL would be pretty boring without West Indian cricketers. They bring so much color to the IPL. They bring color to T20 cricket itself and the world cricket itself in general. I mean, cricket would be very boring if West Indian players don't perform well. Why is West Indies and the West Indian players in general are everyone's second favorite team after their particular home team, right? Because for me, one moment that but I always loved West Indies, but two moments that I truly fell in love with West Indies was when they won the 2005 Champions Trophy in that ridiculous 2004 Champions Trophy in that ridiculous final against England. And then one more time is when in the 2016 World Cup, they lost a match against Afghanistan and they were dancing with Afghanistan players. That to me was like, no other team would do that. I mean, Chris Gale dancing with that wicketkeeper guy from Afghanistan was just amazing to see. So what is it about them that is unique, and what is this Caribbean calypso flavor? What is it about? How do you describe it?
So I don't know if this is the right parallel to draw, but I'm going to draw it all the same. I always say, look at it in the same way how it works in football. Okay, so So let's start with West Indies first, actually. So West Indies story doesn't I don't need to sell the West Indies story. Everybody who's a massive cricket fan, even if you weren't alive when it happens, everyone is aware that the West Indies dominated cricket for 15 years.
Yep.
Between the early 80s and mid 90s.
Fire in the Babylon.
Yeah, exactly. So given the size of the region, that is unprecedented. That shouldn't have been able to happen. And that story, you almost feel will never happen again. Certainly not in our lifetime in terms of cricket, where one team just goes home and away and doesn't lose to anybody really and truly in terms of series. So that sets kind of like the myth of the West Indies. And now there'll be some people listening to this going, no, how can you start in the 80s? What about the Frank Worrell era and so on and so forth? But I'm just talking about in terms of the dominance, the dominance message that was in the 80s and the 90s. Okay, cool. To me, that is very similar to how we talk about Brazil in football. So Brazil are seen as like the quintessential footballing international side. Football almost is, in terms of the beautiful game, you think about Brazil, and again, none of us were alive during that period, but you think about Brazil winning World Cups with Pele and so on and so forth, and then when they came back and won it with Ronaldo, etc. Yeah, exactly, in 2002. Now, what I think the way people have to look at it is, in sport there are certain mythical teams, and the West, like in cricket, West Indies are one. So as a result, and for a generation of cricket fans, I think West Indies are naturally everybody's second team, in the same way how if you're a England international football fan, you love watching Brazil all the same, because there's a certain expectation, no matter what era of Brazil side it is, there's a certain expectation about the cricket you're going to see. So even now, currently in 2021, despite West Indies never or not having been a good test side for going on 20 odd years, because of the birth of T20 cricket, people can still draw parallels between the kind of unbeatable 1980s side and looking at the T20 format and going, that kind of evokes what that 1980s team was about. Even if you don't like T20 cricket, it helps sell the myth and the mythology of West Indian cricketers. And I think also you have to think about the fact that West Indies are unique in that cricket back home, you are still, it's almost like how we are about football back home. So if I'm watching footballers back home, the crowd will celebrate more if somebody nutmegs someone than if the team wins, right? So similarly, translating that to a cricket field, you will be celebrated for hitting 3 sixes in a row or 4 sixes in a row. Beating, as we call it in the Caribbean, beating the ball to the boundary is celebrated. And it's almost like somebody's released a #1 hit song when they beat the ball to the boundary. So if you grow up in that kind of atmosphere where there's almost like an expectation that you're supposed to treat any bowler you come across with disdain, to me it's no surprise that we're a natural fit to 2020 cricket, where there's an expectation that score runs, score quickly, clear the boundary, beat the ball to the boundary for 4 or 6, whatever it might be. So it's, when you really put it in that kind of melting pot, it's no surprise you've had a whole bunch of goats, so to speak, in the shortest format of in the shortest format of the game. That's how I tend to see it.
You put this wonderfully, that the marriage of T20 cricket and West Indies was so seamless, and naturally, as a natural extension, IPL became a very seamless second wife, right? That marriage was even more perfect, right? So tell me about like the popularity of IPL in Caribbean, like, because obviously the timings are not appropriate for you guys, that because of the time zone difference, but is it really popular in Caribbean? People do wake up to watch the matches, especially when their favorite players are in action.
I'm still trying to, from a kind of home-based Caribbean perspective, I'm still trying to get a grip on that. I think when you jump into all like the diehard Facebook groups, which is where you tend to find a lot of the diehard West Indian fans, they're all talking about IPL. So, and that's that surprised me because, like you say, time zone isn't perfect.
Yeah.
But what I think what I don't say, I don't know really if I'd say that it's as simplistic as so people from Trinidad and Tobago are only turning on to see what Puran and Pollard and Bravo do, etc., or are Jamaicans only turning on to see what Chris Gale does or Fabian Allen? Genuinely speaking, and this is my opinion, I could be wrong here. I think that within the Caribbean, we're just supporting Caribbean cricketers. And seeing how they go in tournaments like the IPL. So it's similar to me saying to you, primarily, I want to watch Chris. If Chris Gale's batting, I'm stopping what I'm doing and I'm going to see what his innings is saying.
No matter what shirt he's wearing.
Yeah, exactly. Now, will I do the same if Shimron Hetmyer is batting for Delhi Capitals? Not necessarily, but I'm definitely keeping an eye out for how he's doing. Sure. And I would say that possibly that's how it is in the Caribbean, that depending on your island and dependent on I guess the cricketers you like, you might stop and go see how that particular match goes. That's what I think. I could be wrong though, but there definitely is there's definitely a fan base though for the IPL, 100%.
Sure. How much IPL means to the West Indian cricketers? I don't know if you have spoken to any. I'm pretty sure their lives were changed because I remember hearing to the story of how Bravo was playing for Mumbai Indians and he had to report in West Indies for one match with a couple of days' time. And the management said that don't worry about it. We're going to arrange a private jet for you so that you play a couple of matches for us and they'll go back to your camp in time. And that happened. So these are life-changing stories for cricketers like Bravo, who was a pretty young man back in the day when this happened to him. So is it a true aspiration of an upcoming West Indian cricketer these days, to make it to a league like that?
Personally, I think yes. I think every cricketer will you speak to any cricketer and they'll all say the same thing. Test cricket is the elite. And do you know what? I genuinely believe they mean that. I think sometimes in the West Indies, we're quick to criticize our players and say, oh, they're just saying that. No, I genuinely believe they all think that Test cricket is the elite. And it is. It is. If you're a genuine cricket fan, it's the elite form of the game.
Sure.
But then we have to talk about financial reality. And the reality of the situation is when IPL first kicked off, and to this day, obviously, if you are from the Caribbean, and the thing is, Caribbean cricketers or West Indian cricketers, whichever term we want to use, a lot of them have grown up in relative poverty. Not all of them, but a lot of them, like they haven't had a silver spoon in their mouth. They haven't grown up where access to cricketing equipment and the best facilities is just a given. The private school system that exists in some countries it's not as deep. In the Caribbean, there's good schools, but the private school system that seems to be the pathway in other countries doesn't exist like that in the Caribbean. Okay, so what IPL and other 2020 leagues are, and this is the fact of the matter that I think fans have taken a long time to get their heads around, particularly in the Caribbean. It's a financial way out, and at the end of the day, financial security for a West Indian cricketer is a big thing. You want to be set up, and yes, we as laymen can look and go, but how much money do you need? But come on, if I had the talent and I could showcase that talent on the biggest stage of them all and financially secure my family's future, of course I'm aiming for that. Of course I'm going to go and play in that particular league. Now, what happened in the Caribbean is that when IPL really got big, the problem was, and if you take a Chris Gale and let's take a Gale, Pollard and a Bravo as the first three, right? Gale at that time was a Test cricketer. And I'll always remember there was a series that went on in England, I think in 2000 can't remember the year. I'm going to say it was 2010. And Gale got hammered because he turned up for the England series about 2 days before the series was due to start, because he'd been playing 2020 cricket. And Chris Gale said back then, his quote was taken out of context, but he basically said, unlike some players in the England team, I think he was referring to Andrew Strauss, I wouldn't be too upset if Test cricket died. And of course, there was massive condemnation of what he said. But what Gale actually meant was, I'm good enough to play Test cricket and T20 cricket, and I'm going to make my living out of T20 cricket. Because in fairness, 11 years ago, I'm not sure everyone saw what was going to happen with T20 cricket, but Chris Gale obviously certainly did see what was going to happen with T20 cricket. And he made a financial choice. I want to be able to both represent West Indies and also essentially be a gun for hire in franchise leagues. And in the same way how Gale, Pollard, Bravo almost like were trailblazers in the Caribbean for doing it, every single Caribbean player who has the talent would want to reach the IPL, because let's be real about it, the IPL is the pinnacle of T20 cricket. So as much as people can say, oh, Test cricket is the pinnacle of cricket, okay, cool, but IPL is the pinnacle of T20 cricket. And if you are a serious T20 player, why would you not want to go and play at the highest level, at the highest level of the game? And I guess, sorry for waffling on, but I guess the other way I see it is that all the other leagues are stepping stones to the IPL.
Yes.
The reality of an IPL franchise randomly picking a player because they did well in international T20s, that's slim. They want to see that. Let's pick somebody else who's probably going to get contracts in the future. So Shafane Rutherford, who has had IPL contracts in the past. A franchise wants to see that Rutherford tore it up in CPL, that he tore it up in BPL, that he tore it up in PSL. And when you see them tearing it up in the sub-tier T20 leagues, of course, that's your avenue. So if you're a West Indian cricketer, you need to be going to these other franchise leagues to get your name known, to then get the big IPL bag. So I think it's very harsh and churlish to hold it against these players.
Absolutely.
When it's a financial reality. The only thing I would say is that the players do need to meet cricket boards halfway. That's the only thing I would say, that it can't just be, I want to secure my financial future and I'll represent West Indies when I feel like it. It can't be.
Yeah,
that's going too far the other way. There does need to be a mid ground somewhere, and I think we're starting to get to that stage now. You can see Pollard's now captain of the West Indies white ball teams, and that's the first step in Pollard saying, okay, I've got my Mumbai Indians contract, I might play. I've obviously got my CPL contract as well. Pollard probably doesn't need to play any other T20 leagues, and he'll represent West Indies outside of that, because he's now willing. He's meeting the cricket board halfway and saying, yes, I will commit. So we'll see how the story unfolds in the future.
Well, I hope it had unfolded just before 2019 World Cup. You desperately missed Pollard in that World Cup for sure. And one thing I joke about getting an IPL contract is two ways to get an IPL contract is A, perform against India just before the auction, or perform in the Big Bash League just before the auction. And Shimran Hetmeyer is a classic example of that. He tore Indian bowling apart, got an RCB. That's a joke for another time. But are you an IPL fan though? Like, what are your earliest memories of the IPL as a Caribbean cricket fan? What are the first thing that you remember, first names that you remember? Wind the clock back a little bit if you can.
So IPL, I've been on a bit of a roller coaster IPL journey, because when IPL first started, I think obviously I understood the concept of it, but it was just a bit, I think it was a bit alien to me. Also because I think
to everyone,
time zones wise, in the UK it's behind a paywall. So if you don't have like Sky Sports, then you're not necessarily getting easy access to the games and so on and so forth. So I'll be honest and say that the first moment I really took IPL serious is when Gale had his, is it 2011? What was the year he had that mad season with RCB?
2013.
13, right? Okay. So obviously he'd also hit like the 175. Was it 175?
Yep.
So he'd hit that innings, and that kind of like sent shockwaves around the Caribbean as well, just as somebody who's always been a Chris Gale fan as well, and obviously as a Jamaican, I was just like, wait a minute, what is Chris actually doing? Like that era when Gale was basically going to IPL and doing whatever the hell he wanted. I know we saw Dre Russ have that mad season a couple of seasons back, but for a period of 2 or 3 seasons, Gale was essentially untouchable in T20 cricket. And that's when I kind of got drawn into the razzmatazz of the IPL, because I was like, wait a minute, this is a West Indian cricketer doing things that we may never see in T20 cricket again. I've got to go watch this. So definitely I was into it when Gale was doing his magic. Then I kind of, as Gale dropped off a bit, and I always say that as if like he suddenly turned bad. He didn't. He just dropped off a bit from like all the way up there. So as Gale dropped off a bit, I started to just dip in and out, and also because RCB didn't seem to be able to win. So because I had no
the pain.
And because I had no affinity to any other team, because my affinity was effectively to Gale's team, I was seeing what Bravo was doing with Chennai. I was seeing what Pollard was doing, obviously, with Mumbai, and then obviously Kolkata, Narayan, etc. And then it's only been in the last few years when Dre Russ has then been on the scene and he's been doing his madness, that I've returned again and said, okay, now let me properly watch IPL, but this time with just an exclusive West Indian eye on IPL. So almost dipping in and out to see what different players are saying in the franchises. And I think I'm particularly invested in this year's tournament because the World Cup's at the end of the year. And I think this 2021 edition, I hope people are recognizing in the Caribbean, but certainly around the world, I think people need to understand that this is essentially preparation for a lot of players for the World Cup.
Absolutely.
As well. This isn't just an IPL. For those 9 West Indian players that are in the tournament, I expect all of them to be at the World Cup at the end of the year. This is invaluable that it's in India. And actually, this is more important for these players than playing for West Indies. Right now, in terms of getting their game together, and so on and so forth. So I'm particularly watching this year's edition with a kind of mass West Indian eye, particularly on players like Sunil Narayan. People have written him off. I want to see Fabian Allen get a game. He's not had one yet in the IPL. I want to see if Hetmeyer can get his head together. I want to see if Dre Ross can return to the heady heights that he was hitting in 2019, 18, etc. So there's quite a lot of West Indian subplots to watch in this tournament. I didn't even mention Pooran. So there's so many subplots to watch.
Sure. Let us reminisce some of the top players whom I think have contributed massively to this entire brand of IPL, right? In no particular order. So I'll just begin with Dwayne Bravo. Obviously, he played for Mumbai, but he's basically a Chennai boy right now. Chennai's own son, Chennai's own Thambi, if you can call it in Tamil. He was so popular at one point. I think he got involved in one Tamil movie in a song. If I don't know if you have got to see it, I'll send you the link and I'll put the link in the description if you want. But so many death overs. Even I still the innings that he played in 2018 for Chennai Super Kings against Mumbai is still very fresh in his mind, where he tonked the best of the Mumbai bowlers at the end. So Dwayne Bravo is one of the biggest, like I would call him an IPL legend. Definitely would make into the all-time IPL 11 team in my opinion.
And I think what's interesting about DJ, and I think it's the same for Gale as well, when they eventually stop playing IPL, because this could be Gale's last season, I doubt it, but this could be Gale's last season, and Bravo is probably a year maybe away. Maybe next year will be his last season. I don't know, but I think sometimes we underestimate how much Gale and Bravo in particular are now synonymous with Indian culture as well. So when Bravo stops playing cricket, I expect to see Bravo spending a lot of time in India after cricket, because his music career essentially demands that he does. And what I'm trying to say is, I guess, is India have embraced Bravo. So it's interesting you call him almost like a son of Chennai. Gale and Bravo are almost seen as synonymous between West Indies and India in and of themselves. So do not be surprised if for the next 5 years, irrespective of whether they're playing cricket or not, that you see them on TV adverts, that you see them releasing hit songs that chart in India, because IPL has been bigger than just the cricket. For those two, and in fairness, I'd like to say that they've fully embraced the culture, and they see it as more than them just being cricketers when they go over to India. So, and I think, and away, I mean, looking purely on the cricket in terms of DJ's case, I feel sorry for DJ sometimes, because sometimes I think people forget just how talented he is, given his skill set, right? And I'm not trying to undermine his skill set, but essentially he's a wily medium pacer with tons and tons of variations. He shouldn't be as successful as he is at the age he currently is. But even in Chennai lost their first game the other day, but Bravo was still one of their better bowlers in the game. I'm talking about a 37-year-old. He's still got the deceptive variations at 37 at a time when he should be on a massive decline, and he can still contribute to integral wins. So I think it's also important in the case of someone like a DJ Bravo that we don't just see DJ the entertainer and still understand that this is still a very good cricketer who, like you say, would probably be in an IPL all-time 11. But because he's not got the almost like outside of India, I'm not sure he's got the name that people realize he's at. I almost feel like he's respected more in India for his T20 skills than he is outside of India.
Absolutely.
If you see what I mean.
Yep, absolutely. He kind of also got the perfect leader and the perfect platform for his skill set, right? I mean, he would have not known Dwayne Bravo, the death bowler, if he was only playing for West Indies, if in that case, right? So I think Bravo has done a ton of good to IPL as much as IPL has done a ton of good for Bravo. And moving on to the next player about whom we can probably, I have a plan. Since you've been talking about Chris Gayle so much, I have a plan, and let's make a deal here. So the day Mr. Chris Gayle retires, and me being a massive Chris Gayle fan, because I have been following Chris Gayle since 2000. There was this Champions Trophy where he absolutely hammered Brett Lee. I can't remember the year, but it was in England. It was in England, right? That was when I fell in love with Chris Gayle. But the moment I well and truly fell in love with was when he hit a century against South Africa in semi-final in the Champions Trophy in India. And then the first game of 2007 World Cup, he hit 100. I'm like, dude, I mean, I've always been a fan of attacking batsmen in general. And I found a new attacking batsman along with Sehwag. Gayle was always the only reason that I would switch on my TV to watch. I was kind of disappointed he went to Kolkata because he didn't have any room in Kolkata because already McCallum was dominating. I was delighted when he came to RCB because I am from Bangalore, and as you can see, massive Bangalore fan. When your favorite player comes to your favorite club, it's like marriage made in heaven. And he came down and he smashes that ridiculous 100 against KKR. And the first game that he appears for RCB, boom, 2013, 14, 15, he was all over the posters of Bangalore in the Bangalore city. And I live here. I've seen this. And all over the advertisements. He's responsible for the beginning of this brand of RCB, right? I mean, CSK is the most branded team in IPL, if I can put it that way. But the next best is RCB, and RCB came to this level of branding, and it all started when Chris Gayle arrived, and obviously it got furthered when eventually Virat came to his superpower form and ABD came in. But it was all Chris Gayle, man. It was all Chris Gayle, RCB Chris Gayle, Nama Bengaluru's son, another Bengaluru's son. And when he retires, Michael, you and I will do a Chris Gayle podcast episode.
I'm so glad to see somebody else actually appreciate what Chris has done in the short.
He's a legend. I mean, if you can give me few more minutes. No one hits 10,000 runs in T20 cricket, right? T20 cricket. It's not easy to, I'm not saying it's easy to hit ODI, 10,000 runs in ODI and test match. Can you consider the amount of deliveries he faces in each T20 match, 60, 70 deliveries at max? And I don't know how many sixes, I have no count. Just yesterday, he completed 350 sixes in IPL, if I'm not wrong. I'm pretty sure he has over 1,500 sixes. He's the true ambassador of T20 cricket, in my opinion. If a player like him had not performed the way he performed T20 cricket, I don't think T20 cricket would have got this color that it has right now. He started it all right from that right from that first match in 2007 World Cup. This guy, what a guy.
I think that's a good phrase that you've used there about if he hadn't exploded. I hadn't thought of it that way, because every format of any sport needs a superstar. To almost legitimize sports. So if you think of like with the 100 meters, if Usain Bolt doesn't do what he does over the last, before he retired, obviously, over the last 10, however plus years it was, the people don't tune in the millions upon millions every time he races for the 100 meters. And it was similar for T20. You had, like, I think of somebody like my brother. My brother isn't even that much. He's barely a cricket fan. But when Chris Gayle was doing what he was doing for RCB, even he was tuning in. And that was the effect that Gayle had. That was the effect Gayle had in those kind of initial years of drawing and almost legitimizing, this is why IPL needs to be watched, because you're not going to see this anywhere else.
Yep.
Right now. So yeah, so I see where you're coming from with that.
The thing about Chris Gayle is, and it's like, if there is one cricket, if God comes down and says, pick one cricketer who you would never like to retire, for me, it would be a very hard toss between Chris Gayle and ABD. But man, I don't know why you're saying this is the last. I think he has one more IPL season and one more T20 World Cup in him. Probably this T20 World Cup he'll definitely play, and the next T20 World Cup, which is back to back, which is exactly next year, right? I think he'll pull through. What teams have to realize is that he's not going to be Usain Bolt in the field, so they utilize him properly, manage him, and you just hire him purely for his batting skills. And he would do good. And I love the way he is furthering his career on and on and on.
Exactly.
And massive fan of that. Although he has had some controversial moments, especially with that Mel Jones, the journalist moments. But Chris Gayle, the cricketer, the T20 cricketer, the T20 ambassador, he's a legend. He's up for the history books of T20 cricket.
Definitely.
So yeah, Chris Gayle retirement podcast episode. We are on, right?
Definitely, 100%.
Awesome. I found one podcast guest who's like-minded. Moving on to the next, Mumbai's own son, Pollard. He's another T20 legend who championed this idea of making a career out of T20, right? Along with Chris Gayle, Bravo. Pollard is another legend. I think he was much younger than Chris Gayle and Bravo when he took this decision, and which is a massive decision for a young cricketer. And I remember this young guy from Trinidad and Tobago. He comes to some Champions League sort of T20 tournament. He smashes, I don't know if it is New South Wales or someone, in some semi-final, and boom, next thing you know, Mumbai is hiring him for like $1 million. He's as common as a North Pole star in the Mumbai team in that middle order. What a guy, what a contribution. Another brand value of IPL, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, Pollard is what? Is it 10 seasons now with Mumbai? Must be 10 seasons. No other, I don't think, no, I think he's the only one. No other foreign player has stayed with one, one franchise for the entire, well, you can kind of count Bravo with Chennai, but Pollard essentially is kind of the front runner in terms of a foreign player staying with a franchise. But what's the thing that when I think Kieron Pollard, and actually before I even get to that, first we've got to recognize that his form in the last year has been amazing. He completely dominated when cricket returned after the pandemic. He completely dominated CPL, hitting numbers that nobody else could. And CPL wasn't a very, like, on the pitch, it was relatively low quality. People looked rusty returning to cricket, so on and so forth. But whatever. Pollard was one of the few players in that tournament who didn't look rusty and almost set the international standard and said, no, this is what a proper T20 cricketer is supposed to do. Then obviously he had a brilliant IPL at the back end of last year for Mumbai. And then leading the West Indies as well in white ball cricket. He's been brilliant in that form as well. And I think when I think of Pollard, the Mumbai Indians player, more than his feats on the pitch, what I actually think about is the way you know how good Pollard is the fact that Mumbai have no problem with Pollard leading Mumbai. He could lead them for the whole season, and Mumbai would have no problems with that whatsoever, because that is the level of respect he holds in that dressing room. And that's why when the decision was made about a year and a half ago to give Pollard the white ball captaincy in the Caribbean, that was the best decision West Indies have ever made, because it's not just about Pollard the player, it's about Pollard the cricketing mind.
The leader.
Exactly, there you go. And Pollard is not even so much Pollard the leader. He is a winner, and it's rare that you can, there's how many players can you look at? Okay, yeah, you can say about Virat as well, in fairness. But you know, when you just look at a player on the cricket field and you say, this guy has such high standards that to underperform. So in the same way with Virat, like when a player is substandard, whether for India or RCB or whatever it might be, you see it in Virat's body language. The guy wants to win at all times, no matter what, right? Pollard is very similar to that, where he doesn't suffer fools. There is a clear expectation of, when you play in a team that I'm leading, these are the standards you're expected to reach. And that's why it was important to get him in charge of the white ball teams in the Caribbean. And like I say, and that's why it's no surprise to me that Mumbai have no issue whatsoever with him stepping in to lead the team if he ever has to. And as much as we can talk about Gale, almost, if we look at it in terms of Pollard, the leader, Pollard will also go down in time when he finally retires of, wow, IPL was blessed to have someone for that long. And he'll probably stay with Mumbai for the whole time until he retires.
Probably.
And he'll be recognised in the context of, yes, his numbers, this is what he did with the bat and with the ball, but look at the wider impact he had on the game in terms of helping players develop and so on and so forth.
And if you ever make a highlights reel of all the best catches of IPL, 100 catches, 100 best catches of the IPL, probably 50 of them would be from Pollard, because he has done some ridiculous things, especially on the boundary. One of the best I can't think of a better long on fielder than him, in my opinion. Maybe Maxwell, I don't know, but Pollard, absolute legend, T20 legend. Couple of more legends that I have. I won't call one of them as legend. One, we cannot move past Sunil Narayan and his love story with IPL, his love story with KKR. I mean, there was a time when he was absolutely unplayable. And I think that was also the era where West Indies pulled off those T20 World Cup wins as well, because he was a pivotal part of that team. And one of the reasons why West Indies T20 team is not as strong as the one it was in 2016 is because of the lack of Sunil Narayan. Sunil Narayan is a massive factor. He was the biggest piece of the West Indian bowling puzzle, right? And if he's weak, West Indian bowling is weak. And the genius idea of playing him as an opener, what a revelation. Only IPL could pull that off. And obviously he continued in the CPL as well. Another IPL legend, in my opinion.
Yeah, definitely. And that's why I think it's been disappointing to see how quick some people have been to write Narayan off. And maybe I'm wrong, but KKR aren't, well, I'd like to think that they're not just doing sympathy retentions for somebody like a Narayan, because Narayan, at the end of the day, yes, okay, so is Narayan as good as he was? Of course not. No, the numbers alone tell you so, and everybody knows.
Especially after the action.
Since he's had to remodel his action, everyone can see what the numbers are saying. But what I often get confused about when people say, oh, he's not as good as he used to be, even with his remodeled action, he is still being treated with the ultimate respect by batsmen. Batsmen, generally speaking, are still afraid to go after him. Now, how many players do you know where they remodel bowlers, where they remodel their action and they're not as effective, but they still aren't getting punished for their bowling? So I think we you don't, but we underestimate how good a player Narayan is, and that's why I was saying to you at the top of your show, I was saying there's so many subplots for this year in IPL for the West Indians, and for me, like I say, one of the big ones is Narayan. Now, obviously, he didn't play in KKR's first game. I think they're playing today, aren't they, against Mumbai? So I want to see how they are doing throughout how he does throughout the rest of the tournament. How many games he gets, and as you say, West Indies will need him. World Cup. If we go into the World Cup at the end of this year and Narayan's not in the team, okay. For the last 2 years saying West Indies are going to win the World Cup. But if we don't have Narayan, I am willing to accept that makes us significantly weaker. And this is, of course, where his own confidence or lack thereof of how his action will hold up in international cricket. That's the issue. That's the number one issue, because even in last year's edition of IPL, there was I think he was called. Was he not called last year? Or one of the umpires called him, but then he was cleared and whatnot. So Sunil himself is worried about what will happen in international cricket. So it's perfectly plausible that West Indies will never see him in the maroon again. Who really knows? So I think when we did our IPL show with the podcast, the one thing I said to the guests was, I can see Sunil possibly leaving KKR. Sure. I don't know if it'll be next season or if it'll be the season after, but that doesn't mean he won't get an IPL contract. I just think he'll go to a weaker side. When IPL expands, I think Narayan will just pick up a contract at a weaker franchise. But his KKR journey might be coming to an end, but that shouldn't mean that we dismiss what he has contributed over the piece in IPL.
One last player that we have to absolutely mention, and obviously we cannot go past Andre Russell, the current favorite son of KKR, if you can consider Narayan the old favorite son of KKR. Andre Russell's hitting in 2018-19 seasons has been, I would say, after Chris Gale's storm after 2014-15, I think if there was ever been a storm in the T20 arena, obviously ABD keeps producing storms. So if you can call it a West Indian storm after Chris Gale, it was Andre Russell in 2018 and 19. He just took the game of six hitting to next level.
100%. And
one of the most, I'm sorry to interrupt you. One of the most painful memories as an RCB fan is when he hit that 60 runs of the last 3 overs against RCB, against Tim Saudi and all that. That was so painful to watch, but it was great hitting. Sorry, go on.
No, I feel your pain, but do you know what? I sometimes run out of the whatever superlatives can be thrown at Andre Russell. There's a friend of the podcast we've got who's written him off and said that West Indies don't need Andre Russell anymore. And I always say to him, what on earth are you talking about? Andre Russell could be 50% fit and he'll always play for the West Indies when the World Cup happens.
Sure.
The only question mark we've actually got about Andre Russell is that, and ultimately what you've said is obviously correct. He's taken six hitting and into a different realm when he's fit. And I say when he's fit because that's the only question mark. Andre Russell's fitness. Now, obviously, KKR. So, Andre had a subpar CPL. He then had a really bad IPL, obviously 2020. But he wasn't fit. He wasn't fit for CPL. He wasn't fit for IPL, and he decided to guts it through. Probably he shouldn't have even played. By the time he got injured in IPL, he probably should have just dropped out of the tournament at that point. But obviously, and this is almost the problem. Andre Russell can't say no. So there were games for the Talawars in CPL, and he did the same for KKR, where he obviously shouldn't have been on the field. He wasn't fit enough, and you could just see it. You could clearly see, and this is why Andre has had so many problems with his knees over the years. That when his body's telling him no, he would rather probably take a painkiller and get out on the field because he feels like his team needs him. And the only thing, and I say this, he's a son of Jamaica, obviously. The only thing I've always said, I've been saying it since about 2019 for Andre: stop bowling. But nobody can tell Andre to stop bowling because he wants to be in the game. If Andre Russell is on a cricket field, he wants to be bowling. He wants to be batting. He wants to be taking superb catches. He doesn't feel he's contributing unless he's still, ultimately, Andre still sees himself as a prime time all-rounder. Now, my personal opinion is that Andre Russell needs to model his game on how Kieron Pollard plays 2020 cricket, in so much as Pollard obviously isn't as an effective bowler as Andre Russell. In terms of Andre believes he can hit top speeds and bounce people out, etc. But Pollard, when he plays 2020 cricket, will bowl overs from Mumbai here and there. Might bowl 2 overs, 1 over, might not bowl for 3 matches, then he'll bowl a 4-over spell, whatever. I do not understand, given that Andre would be employed by every single franchise as a batsman only if he chose to market himself as a batsman only because of his destructive ability with the bat that few can match.
Sure.
He doesn't need to bowl to maximize his okay. Sorry, let me start again. He would say he needs to bowl to maximize his worth, but I believe that such is Andre's ability with the bat that I don't think he needs to anymore to maximize worth. Franchises would pick him regardless. So I understand his personal drive. I understand his belief that he needs to contribute to all teams in all formats of the game. But KKR this year, like I was both shocked and not shocked to see Andre bowling in the first match KKR had. But if I'm KKR, Andre Russell is like my last ditch bowler. He should be used as a golden arm bowler. If you see what I mean. Okay, we've tried our first 5 who we'd earmarked to take 20 to bowl our 20, but someone's taken a bit of tap. Andre, bowl us a 1-over spell here. Do you see what I mean? As opposed to Andre, you're going to come into this match and you are definitely
bowling 4 overs
to bowl your full set of 4. And why? So right. You tell me. I don't know. I don't know why we're still at that stage with Andre and why we don't just focus on making him become as an effective batsman as he can possibly be.
Is that what happened in 2019 World Cup with Andre, you think? Because I thought he should have finished certain games that he didn't. Like, for example, that game against Australia in 2019 World Cup, which was totally in West Indies' hands. Do you think that's what happened in 2019? Because the bowling is taking a toll on Andre Russell, the finisher, if that way?
That game against Australia was effectively the end of West Indies World Cup. And if I remember rightly, Andre bowled 8 overs in that match. I don't think he bowled his full spell, but each over he was getting progressively worse in terms of the toll it was taking. Like, you could literally physically see what was happening to his body as he was getting through each over.
Yeah.
Obviously, he was picked to go to that World Cup as an all-rounder, but again, it was poor. It was poor man management of the player because he clearly wasn't fit. Or certainly, sorry, let's start again. He wasn't fit enough to bowl a full quota.
Sure.
So again, teams just need to be mindful of that. Obviously, T20 is a much shorter game, but if you know that Andre Russell isn't fit enough to bowl a full quota of overs, rather than give him a painkiller and tell him to get through it anyway, or allow him to tell you he's going to do it anyways, is it not better for that painkiller injection, if you have to do it, for him to come out at the end and maybe bat 3 overs, 4 overs? Yeah. Yep. So like I say, there just needs to be better man management of Andre Russell. Actually, he needs to manage himself a bit better.
Exactly.
Given KKR paid for him to go and do all this, the last 2-3 months he's been with the Dallas Cowboys getting fit. KKR wouldn't do that for Andre Russell unless they are fully invested in him for the next 3 to 4 years as a franchise player. So if they're willing to do that, I think they need to look at the whole package around Andre and sit him down and say, Andre, we are fully invested in you. You are our franchise player, but we want you to be our franchise player with the bat. But I don't know who can convince Andre Russell to do that.
Yeah. Well, those were my list of IPL legends of West Indies cricket. Some honorable mentions, obviously, which I forgot to tell, were the dashing opener Dwayne Smith, who I used to love when he used to play for CSK, Darren Swamy whenever he was present. And who is the future brand? Who can take forward the brand of IPL? Which West Indian cricketers are you looking at right now and seeing like, yep, these guys will be the future brand ambassadors of IPL? For me, Nicholas Puran immediately comes to my mind. And I think there is Hetmeyer has a lot to offer to IPL. I think Fabian Allen's talent is something that is yet to be unraveled on IPL. Players like Kimo Paul. I'd like to see more bowlers come from West Indies cricket, but these are the names that pop up in my head right now.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. Puran and Hetmeyer lead the list. Fabian's is a funny one just because left arm finger spinner. It's hard. It's going to be hard for him to get games. As a spinner, his batting would almost need to be so good that do you see what I mean? He's not gonna, even though for the West Indies his bowling is good enough for him to get into our side, but the reality is, do you think any IPL franchise is really going to pick Fabian Allen because he happens to be an above average bowler? Left arm finger spinner? No, they've got enough to pick from within India itself. So his batting's going to have to probably go up another level, if you see where I'm coming from. But I hope Fabian gets his chance. And then in terms of players who aren't in IPL yet, who maybe one day Okay,
or
I'm going to say
who should be but have not been picked because of performing at the wrong times and not performing at the
yeah.
right time. What are
Okay,
those kind of names that come to your head? Chemo Paul is one
Chemo.
example.
Yeah, Chemo Paul. His form has gone off a bit of a bridge at the moment, but he'll come good again one day. But you're right in terms of bowlers. Actually, do you know somebody to look out for? But he again, like almost like what we said right at the top of the show. To get an IPL contract, you have to either, as you say, happen to play well just before the tournament, do something against India, or basically put together a series of T20 competition performances. In the same way how Sheldon Cottrell got that big contract,
oh yeah,
and obviously being dropped, Obed McCoy, left arm pacer, who essentially is Sheldon Cottrell's understudy and may in fact pass Sheldon Cottrell in the very near future. I would look out for him only because he starred in the T10 in Dubai. Was one of the few bowlers to not get absolutely marmalized by the batsman in a format where bowlers basically get destroyed.
Yeah.
He's subsequently been picked in the West Indies T20 side, was good against Sri Lanka in the series we just had, and has a good set of variations. And more importantly, he's a left armer. When you're a left armer, when you're a left arm pacer, you immediately, people have to start looking at you because you're just offering something different immediately. So if he can keep rising his stock, I can see him. Maybe not. I don't know. Just look out for him. All I'll say to your viewers is look out for Obed McCoy. He well, and he's only 24.
It's like exactly. So it's like one of those players that Mumbai picked right from South Africa, Marco Jansen. Exactly. Who is the West Indian Marco Jansen that we are missing that you can tell us about? Is what I was trying to get at.
Yeah, so I would actually then in that I would say Obed McCoy, but then because he's played internationally for West Indies, people would say they know his name. So I guess with a Jansen, you're looking at somewhere like somebody totally out of the blue.
Yeah.
who nobody was even looking at.
Sure.
I'm gonna have to hold fire on that. I'll have to private message you and say this is who I should have said.
Well, I'll be waiting for that message. Nicholas Puran, I have very high hopes. This guy can take forward the IPL brand like Chris Gayle and the other folks before him did. He's my current favorite West Indian batsman right now. For a little guy, he hits ridiculously long sixes. I have no clue how. Last question on this episode. What is your opinion on how do you think IPL could do more to bring awareness to the issue of racism in cricket, right? For example, you have seen the episode of Darren Swamy coming out with allegations, and it's just weird how the same Mumbai that loves Pollard so much was the same Mumbai crowd that was shouting the M word against Andrew Simons back in the day when all that monkey gate scandal happened, right? So what do you think IPL can do more to promote the way England Cricket Board was okay to, give support to the Black Lives Matter symbol before the start of the England West Indies Test series? So is there anything do you expect more from IPL administration in that sense?
No.
Okay.
Okay. But let me explain why. I'm still saying no, but okay. What I've noticed since like Black Lives Matter and obviously so West Indies, England West Indies was the first cricket really to return after the pandemic and the say after in fact it was during the time that Black Lives Matter was really on the tip of everybody's tongue. Now what's quite interesting to me is since that all started, so what that's only a year ago, in fact less than a year ago, summer of 2020. The only cricket team who is still regularly raising awareness of that is still the West Indies team. So when we went to New Zealand, the New Zealand players joined the West Indians in acknowledging that. Same happened in Bangladesh. Just played Sri Lanka at home. We continued it there. I am not saying that other teams or other competitions have to do something. I'm not saying they have to, but what I'm saying is it's noticeable that nobody else is. Okay. Now, so bringing it specifically to IPL, one of the reasons why I think it won't happen, beyond the fact that other competitions aren't really doing anything, although CPL did, is that if at the top end of So we're talking about the CEOs now. We're talking about the higher heads of any organization. If you do not believe something is an issue, why would you do something about it? Okay. Or if you do not believe that highlighting something helps you maximize your global worth, why would you do something about it? And I could be wrong. So do you know what? This could well be the part of your show which gets the most comments on it. Who knows? But ultimately, I've always said that anything to do with racism and sport is only highlighted if the people at the very top end genuinely want it to be highlighted, or they feel embarrassed if they don't highlight it. Like they'd almost be like,
everyone is doing it.
Yeah, everyone's doing it, so we better do it. Or if we don't do it, we're going to be highlighted for not doing it. I just don't believe teams, organizations, companies genuinely care enough, because it's the difference between thinking that Black Lives Matter and you're trying to eradicate racism from a sport. It's the difference between thinking it's a moment that you deal with something, or if it's something that you continually have to deal with, because you recognize that unless people are continually reminded, attitudes won't change, or people won't have the difficult conversations, or people will think, or it's about making sure that people don't think, oh, that was then, it's done now, like we solved the problem, everything's okay now. But I also know, but in fairness, I also understand why companies don't want to do it as well, because the backlash, they're probably afraid of the backlash as well.
Yeah.
Of how many. So
I was very curious if what England and West Indies did before the start of every test match, if they had done with the crowds in, I would be very curious about the reaction of the crowd.
Yes, basically, I'm trying to think how do I carry that on. But ultimately, yes, I have always been worried, and I'll use football as an example. When the fans return in the Premier League in England, I will be surprised if players are still taking a knee, because I would not be shocked if some crowds in some places, for example, don't treat it with respect. Now, I don't know if cricket's the same, but again, I think that going back to your question, I just think that some organizations, some companies are more afraid of the backlash than they are of taking a stand. And that could be social media backlash. So say, for example, let's just say randomly, let's say IPL had started off with every single player taking a knee. Do you think, and I'm putting this question to you, do you think that would have been looked at kindly on social media by the fans of, I'm trying to remember what the opening game was, Mumbai Indians, and can't remember who the other team was in the first game.
Depends on who you ask, basically.
Yeah, right. Exactly. And so there you go.
I feel that because, your brothers, your West Indian brothers have contributed so much to the league and so much to your particular franchise. For example, say Mumbai. I mean, the least you could do is stand with a guy like Pollard or something like that. And there's nothing wrong in it, in my opinion. But yeah, it depends on who you ask, I guess.
Right. And I agree with you, but I just feel like there would have been enough people. I'm not saying like commentators and things like that. I'm just saying kind of like.
Yeah, there will be people on Twitter like, dude, there is no racism in India. We are not racist. I'm like,
exactly, bro. Yeah. Right, exactly. So I would expect the response to be, what are we doing this for? There's no racism in India. Why are we doing this? This is just performative. So on and so forth. And I just wonder if sometimes companies are so afraid of that backlash that they don't want to be seen as doing the right thing or highlighting. But also, and I'll end here because we could talk about this forever.
Yep.
The other thing to say, though, is, and I don't want to try, and I'm going to just briefly say it because I don't want to talk on something that I'm not fully, I haven't fully read on it myself.
Okay.
But let's just look at it in the context of IPL and just in the context of India. Racism within India is a different kind of, if you're going to highlight racism IPL wise, yes, you can do like a worldwide racism thing, but in the context of India, placing it in India. There's a bigger conversation to be had within Indian culture. Forget Black Lives Matter for a second. If you're gonna do it as IPL, well, you're peeling back a big can of worms. If you just think there's a deeper level of conversation that needs to go on for Indians within Indian culture and how that manifests. Do you get where I'm trying to come from?
Yep.
And I can see just from that perspective why IPL wouldn't even want to touch it in that perspective, never mind a worldwide global issue as well. So this is a deeper conversation that we could go for hours and hours on.
I think you nailed that thing on the head. It would open a different can of worms, and bro, there are endless amount of can of worms in India. Let's not get started about that. But what a fascinating episode! What a great way to reminisce the West Indian contribution to IPL. As part of this IPL, we hope more and more West Indian players come out and perform, and we love having them. It as I said, this league is nothing without you folks, and you bring so much. You bring more than color, you bring more than calypso, you bring your game, you bring your style, and yeah, you're the only team who danced with Afghanistan. You know that, and who wouldn't want players from a region like that? It's awesome. Thank you, Michael. I hope you had a good time on this conversation. It was wonderful chatting with you.
No worries. Absolute pleasure. And for all those listening, as I always say, if I jump on anybody else's podcast, I do that thing where it's like, hit that button below, subscribe, like, share it, do all of that stuff. Always support every single platform that you're watching a podcast on. And the more people you share it with, the greater platforms become. So thank you very much for having me on. Totally. I've loved it. Great conversation, man.
No problem. Michael, before I let you go, tell us all the good stuff on its social media, where we can find Caribbean Cricket Podcast, Spotify, Apple, just if you can very quickly for the listeners.
Yeah. So on all the platforms, just search Caribbean Cricket Podcast. Wherever you listen to your podcast, just go there. And then on Twitter, we're at Carib Cricket. So you can find us there, and YouTube as well. But like I say, absolute pleasure being on. Hope you've all enjoyed it, and stay locked in.
That's it from this podcast. Thanks to Michael once again. Thanks to everyone, listeners and viewers. Till we see you next time with another episode. Bye, everyone.